You have to put yourself in shoes of your future self and then look back and say, is this going to be important or needed 5, 10 years from now?
The piece that you said about getting in front of actual customers when you're talking to them, that's when they may tell you no, but if it did this, I'm in. I think then during that period, that feedback you get could be critical.
Welcome to episode 4 of This is the Way with Artin and Michael. Yes, the name is exactly what you think it's referencing. We wanted to do this podcast and we talked about it a lot and eventually got going, but we were at a place that we just wanted to start sharing the experience and science and knowledge that we have around career growth and how to pursue your own projects on the side and entrepreneurship. And hopefully we show others the way, people that were or are in our shoes when we were 10, 15 years ago, or even 20 years ago. Maybe you could consider us as your Jedi to guide you on your path. Today's episode, we want to focus on the importance of idea validation. This is as important for executives in the corporate world as it is for experienced and aspiring founders. Mike, do you remember those first few ideas we had? Yeah, maybe stories, but I'm talking about products. But do you remember those first few ideas we had?
Yeah. Let's see. You wanted to build sex toys. And I'm just kidding. Okay. Sorry. Hopefully that keeps people engaged. No. Yeah. So one of the ones, actually, I remember it was called Anonymate. And the idea is, combine the words anonymate and comment, because at that time, just like today, you can actually find internet addresses that are available that aren't a combination of some sort of words. In fact, today, what people have to change letters in them. But anyway, anonymate, the idea and what it came from is I remember at the time working with someone who I didn't feel was very receptive to feedback. And I thought, you know what? We need a method to be able to send some feedback to people like that so they get it, but they don't know who it came from, because unfortunately in many companies, if not most companies, it's not always a strong suit from individuals. So anyway, that was one of the first ones I do remember. I know social nightlife evolved also, and I'm trying to think of a few other ones. I feel like there was a couple of others, but they might have been abandoned.
Yeah, there was one of the ideas was, I think, called carsquirrel.com.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And the whole idea about that was, and we'll get into it. I think sometimes the idea was pretty decent, even when I think about it now, but we lacked execution because we didn't know what we were doing. But sometimes we got too excited about the idea and rush forward with it without actually stepping back and saying, does anybody actually want this? But Car Squirrel, the whole idea was, what if you flip car buying and look at it from a different angle, where right now most services are set up in a way that a customer needs to know, I want a BMW, I want this, or I'm looking. They should have an idea what they're looking for. So Car School was supposed to be, you know what? I know what I can afford. That's just an example. I can afford $400 a month on a monthly payment. You submit that this is what you can afford, and then you have actual car dealerships or whatever kind of coming back and bidding, trying to win your business. And I still think it's a good idea. I don't know if there's anything out there similar to it, but we lacked execution on that one.
Yeah, I think there might be some companies that have basically built that in, almost like think about some of the insurance companies and others where, you put it on there and then they get to come back and you hear from the different dealerships or whatever on that one. So, but yeah, that's right. No, car squirrel. Forgot. That was one of the ones where you still were able to at least use single words and not have to jam them together. Like, we've done with so many of the others later. So yeah, no, those are interesting. We obviously have a graveyard of different movie ideas too, and scripts and things like that we had also come up with, over the years. And, when you think about any of these ideas in general. I mean, anybody could come up with that idea, but back to what you were just saying, it's execution ultimately. But something that I've seen people do in the movie space to try to get some of their projects seen, and it's worked in some occasions, is where they'll actually create like a mini trailer, which is almost their approach to a business plan or validating their product. And it's worked in some scenarios, but I don't think you've heard enough stories where that's probably really, the right approach to it. But
Yeah. I would argue, though, that story ideas are different than product, service, or like business ideas. Um, Mainly because you can come up with a story idea, even with a trailer, and you can get people to buy into it. But when entire script is so critical to that idea, so it goes back to the execution of it. Like, how do you execute that story idea uh, makes a big difference. But on a product or service, if you have an idea, you validate it, and with the caveat that this is not your first rodeo, and you kind of know the process, that the chance of success is high because your idea that you validated with actual customers will end up being very close to that versus a story idea. It might take a life of its own and be very different once you're done with the script.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I would actually say they're similar because if you think about it with a story, back to what you said, if you have especially some credibility or whatever it is around your capabilities to stand something up, well, think about a known writer or known filmmaker, producer, whatever it is. Oftentimes, all they're doing is they're taking the actual high level concept. They're taking the log line and they're taking a synopsis or something that they wrote on that before they even get it to a script. And to me, if you think about what happens, I think in product or at work, it's very similar. You're taking this thing that ultimately at that time you could say is like your baby. Somebody might shoot it down and destroy it, but you're trying to get past a certain group of people to see if you have buyers. The buyers in one case is a studio. The buyers in another case could be your boss, or it could be a future investor, depending on what we're looking at here. And I think from there, just like anything, I mean, there's a graveyard of original concepts for things like, I'm trying to think of some examples on the spot here, but I don't think Instagram started off as Instagram. I don't think Square started off as Square. Like all of these started off as something else. So just like a movie gets remade multiple times, I actually think a business does too, because sometimes you could get a false validation that what you're doing might be right. Or oftentimes people will just do it anyway. And you could say that's like writing a full script and just hoping that it converts, and it may or may not. And that's when all of a sudden the concept may get purchased, but the whole thing gets, reworked.
Yeah. Instagram, started off as bourbon, and their whole idea was a location-based app, kind of like Foursquare, which I have no idea what happens to Foursquare. But once the founders started looking at the data, they noticed that most users are just using the photo filters, and that's where they pivoted and said, you know what, we're just gonna bet on this and go all in and just focus on an app that's around pictures and filters. And they changed the name and it took off. You can't do that with movies. You can't just completely pivot and say, I'm going to dump this movie and go this way. Unless you're a big studio. Yeah, sure.
Well, but I mean, that's who's buying them. I guess that's how I see it, is I actually think it happens all the time in studios. And that's why you'll hear about movies that have been in, what do you call it? Turnaround or that have been reworked forever, and it's on writer number 6. And when you look at some of these movies and you see all the writers on it, they literally each time said, we know there's something here, but let's bring in somebody else to try to take a crack at it. I guess maybe a difference with it, although there may be some examples that go against this, is when you are building a product or when you're basically pitching for an idea at work, for something, those do heavily come down to problems you're solving. And in movie making, I guess there's not necessarily a problem in those cases. You're trying to pitch for a new big creative idea. And those do happen in some cases, I think, with products less often because people want to know how they're going to get their money back. In the workplace, you do have some passion things that people would just say, let's do it. And sometimes you might get away with that without a clear pathway to money earned. And if you're an Elon Musk saying we're going to go to Mars, people listen. But what they're more interested in is some of these other, projects that he's going to look at that solve that then provide the pathway there, like providing energy solutions and satellite, solutions and cheaper ways to get to, so he's been able to monetize that big dream.
He sure has. So, remember the animation idea we had that we almost sold?
Was it Zubreak?
Zubright, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, that was fun. Um, we got so close. We got so close.
Yep, exactly it. But in that case, we didn't have the right people buying. And it turns out in that case, there were 3 others on the market. People looked at it and they weren't willing to invest in it because they're like, you know what? Turns out we have something similar. This person has something, or this studio has something similar, and this one here has something, similar. So I think right concept, but in a saturated, further along market that people don't want to take the risk. And again, to me, that's something that feels similar to any idea somebody might pursue in general also. And it's like, what is your, what's the term? I'm going blank on the term. When you stand out in your market, your unique value, proposition. And I think that's similarly what you have to think about for any product, and for that matter, any effort that you're going to pursue in the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, even the product that eventually raised $4 million for became the big startup on the side that led to the book. That went through many pivots.
Yeah.
But we were lucky enough that we had an investor that bought into the vision and was okay to come along on the ride with us on the different pivots that we took. And it eventually got there, but it was not easy. But the whole idea of constantly talking to customers and validating ideas was important.
Yeah.
I want to go into talking about just the importance of validating ideas. And to me, there's 2 main reasons. One is market validation, because you might have this like groundbreaking idea, but if large enough market doesn't need it and is not going to pay you for it, it's now like a hobby or it's a research project, like academic research. So making sure that the market actually needs what your idea is. The second one to me is at that idea stage, it's the least riskiest stage to actually test and change and pivot, because you don't have anything yet to rebuild. It's all just idea. That's why it's so important to do. And what actually will be even a better approach is you start with a problem and then you attach an idea to it. Now, if you did start with an idea, then you have to start thinking about, well, what problem is this actually solving? But if you want to think about, instead of having your mindset be, oh, I want to come up with ideas, I want to come up with the next big thing, it might not happen. The new ideas are pretty difficult. And when they're brand new ideas from people that haven't had credibility or a proven track record, nobody really pays attention to. So it's actually easier to kind of just look at, well, is there a problem that I can solve? And I usually think about 4 or 5 questions that you can ask that say, okay, here, what problems? One is, why does something cost so much? Why does something cost so much? Is there a reason for it? Can we make it cheaper? That's one way to approach a problem. Then you can use
sorry, I was going to toss an example on there. Like, again, taking it back to what I was saying with Elon Musk. Why does it cost so much money to fly people into space or to launch satellites? And when you look at something like that, it's because the cost of the rocket. All right, well, what if the rocket could land itself and you could reuse it? And thus, an idea is born.
Exactly. The next one is, can you use technology to cut out the middleman? Because in most cases, the entire value chain is what feeds the eventual price. Well, if you decrease the steps within the value chain, you could lower the price in most cases and make something more efficient. And, let's think Uber as an example.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Just
Uber,
use an app, call your ride. You cut out the call center or whatever, you raising your hand, whatever you did. The next question
Well,
is,
actually,
what?
before you go forward on that one too, I think
Yeah,
something else. Yeah, because when you said that, I was thinking Uber, I think Airbnb. It's like you used to have to go through a property management company to be able to handle any of that. Now you don't have to worry about that. And I think that's why the term you see people regularly use, it's like the Uber or like the Airbnb of X. They now have it around car rental with Turo. They now have it around bike rental, baby gear rental. Like there's so many of these that once people saw that paradigm shift, they could then start seeking those and thinking about how they could do it. And I want to take this one and the previous one just for a quick second too and apply those back in careers, because something you and I frequently did is we would look at it and we'd be like, okay, great. Like we looked at process, and once you had a process really nailed down, well, then you could add automation around it. And once more, we're cutting out the need for you to hand something off to somebody else. And now you could take care of that. And then for the other one about how much something costs, well, that's literally what we spend a lot of time, and so many, leaders and companies do, is they look at their, financial reports, or at least some of the analysis that dives deeper in it. And they're like, where are we spending a lot of money? So I think that problem and how you approach that, those are specific ways that we've tackled it also, and more micro in our own careers.
yeah, 100%. All this applies to entrepreneurship world or the corporate world as well.
Yep.
Uh, the next question that I usually kind of ask myself is, can something work in multiple industries? And that's kind of your example, the Uber of this or the Airbnb of this. And where I've seen this very successful is other countries seeing what's successful in the US, and they just copycat it, because
Yeah.
almost every somewhat technically advanced country has their own Uber, has their own Airbnb, because they see what's working, especially China. They
Yeah.
It's just a copy of what it is.
And I'll take it back the other way too. Well, in this scenario here, you've got TikTok that's coming out of China, or that's from, and then in this case, there's a question of will it be banned? And now, of course, what's happening is you have the YouTubes, with their shorts, or the YouTube, you have YouTube with their shorts. And you have now, Facebook and Instagram, like they're looking to see how they could push more and develop features around this because they want to capitalize on that. And taking it back to short-term rentals, it's funny, a lot of the what they call channel managers, which is what connects your different platforms so that you can manage, working with through VRBO and Airbnb and bookings.com all through one platform. They have different tools out there. What's really peculiar is so many of those are actually developed in other countries. So I think at the same time, we're all borrowing each other's, ideas. And then I think what you said on industries, I was just recently watching, we love those shows on History Channel that tell us a little bit of like, how some of these companies or corporations or titans came to be. And there was one that talked about when Ford really nailed the whole supply chain thing. Well, everybody then started thinking about how they can do that in their industry. And the key is to pick up on these things and move fast. And on that note, and then I'll be quiet, on a future topic, I want us to really dive into AI, because I think that's one of those key ones now that you look at that you're going to start seeing industries apply. And then another industry is going to say, here's what this could do, for me in that space. And I know I lied. I said almost there. Last thing I'll say is in the workplace, because I want to tie it back to that too. Departments. It's so easy to do this. I mean, we were one of the departments that were the first to be ISO 9001, certified for quality management. Well, when another department decided they want to do that, what did they do? They plucked us out of there and moved us over to the other department so we could do the same thing there. So in that scenario, it benefited our careers because they literally said, this solution could work for us and we could see the benefits to it. Let's move. So
Yeah, totally. Before I rattle off the last question I usually ask, you reminded me of the idea that I had after the big one that got acquired. And it was all around internally looking at Disney and seeing it's so inefficient around resourcing. Because you could have one team that's extremely busy and working 12 hours a day for months at a time, while another one is kind of cruising along. But there's really no way to level set that. So the idea that I came up with was called efficient, and it was spelled with a fish, because the whole idea was, organizations need to be efficient, like a school of fish, and that was the logo as well.
and because that's what you have to do these days anyway, is make up words. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Um, Anyways, that idea didn't go anywhere, because then my wife got pregnant, and I was like, "There's no way I could It just wasn't possible.
I was going to say with that idea, to me, it's because I always liked the idea, but I was very curious to see, and this was one of those to really test and understand how it would work when you tried to spread that across the company, because there's dynamics sometimes that you end up facing where sometimes people are protective of their crew and stuff. Like you would have to be in the right culture where they were very open to collaboration. I think of like Ray Dalio's Bridgewater. He literally has this way internally where they have almost like baseball cards and you could see people's strengths and weaknesses so that you can connect. And they actually try to connect people to help shore those up and stuff. Like companies like that, brilliant. And I think if more companies adopted that, it would be great. So that's why I was really excited about it. But I was also like wondering how it would actually get through the product market fit stage.
Yeah, well, I never got there. I
Right.
got stopped in the idea validation
Yep.
process. All right, so to round off the questions is, why does a specific product or service frustrate me? Because that also is kind of that trigger to say, well, if I'm frustrated by something, maybe a bunch of other people are as well. And if I can
Yeah.
solve that problem for myself, I'm solving it for a bunch of others too, and it could turn into a business. And those are very simple questions that you could ask to try to find a problem to attach an idea to, instead of just thinking that you're going to have a lightning in the bottle and come up with this brilliant idea that's earth shattering.
I think that last one that you said, where I think about a lot of consulting businesses that have grown up, have heavily grown out of that one. And people have stood up, literally in that case, the business is helping people solve those specific things, sometimes just by connecting them to the right solution and technology, let alone obviously also looking to see how you can make something less, cumbersome. It's always easy to go to government related functions or like the DMV, at least California DMV. I'll say Idaho DMV, much nicer. You can get in and out of there. But California, it's like, oh my gosh, like, why does it have to be this way? Medical, I think, is another one. But some of these places, as ripe as they are, still struggle and hold on to, the past. But in the workplace, there's loads of, I think, situations like that where people feel that way, and it becomes a question of how you can solve. Actually, one of them, because I'm familiar with the questions you ask, because I also, again, try to ask myself these questions, and I think they apply a lot to what I reference about people trying to find their, force multiplier, which is something that, is going to help their career. It's like their big value add job. But I think you left one of them off there, which is about looking at the time that something takes and how long it takes. If you want to just detail that one a little bit too.
Yeah, I mean, it's as simply as that. Like, why does something take so long to do? And it could be anything from, in the past, if you wanted to book an airline or a hotel, go through a travel agent, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Now it's just book in 5 seconds. You have all your options in front of you,
Totally.
and it just speeds it up. That's the hotel thing is fresh in my mind because last night that's all I was doing. The kids are on summer vacation holiday from preschool, 4th of July week. I was like, we got to go somewhere. If they're home, they'll drive us crazy. So I was looking at options. So that's why it's fresh in my mind.
It's funny. I hear you say that. I think you said they're on like their, I think you call it summer vacation. I think you mean spring, but I never really thought about like vacation for kids from school. Like it's a good way to put it. I always think about it, call it break, like summer break, spring break.
Sure.
But it's funny.
I call it vacation because it was for me.
No, but it's fair. It is. It's like their vacation. I just hadn't phrased it that way. It makes me feel like I need to make sure my kids are living up their vacation a bit more. I think one of these examples that I'll share on this one on the workplace side of things is there's back when we were building out, DVDs, Blu-rays, which was, hopefully most people understand and remember this. They still sell them in stores, although we did for a little bit work on VHS for a tiny bit too. But those people may not remember. But the DVDs and the Blu-rays, it took like a really long time. Like it could take not quite half a year, but like it was a long production time to be able to produce all of those for global, like we would localize them all around the world so that people could watch them in the different languages, dubs, subtitles, graphics. And it took, I want to say, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. I think some of the timelines were like 160 days. And one of the things that I had focused on and introduced there were referred to as the no-fat timelines that, we work closely together on too. And in that scenario, it was literally trying to figure out how you could solve and take that time out to produce those, which then greatly reduce the cost as well. So I think that's just kind of one of those examples. There's plenty of places. There's something in lean management or lean fundamentals that's known as is it a value stream map? And with a value stream map, you're literally looking at it and you're saying, okay, it's popular in manufacturing. You have a step that happens here. You have a step that happens here. Let's say here's where you actually saw the wood that you're producing a cabinet out of. Over here is where you then assemble the cabinet. Over here is where you then, sand the cabinet down, put the legs on it, all that. And then over here's quality control. Well, if you're sitting in between each of those steps for, a day before it gets to the next one, well, that thing that actually only takes 3 hours to produce ends up actually taking you 5 days to produce because of all that time lost. So I think that's where I love looking at these value stream maps and trying to figure out exactly where you could reduce that. Because the minute you reduce that, you're now reducing the warehouse space you needed to store those things. You're now often moving things around so that you can actually make things more productive. It's a lot of what Ford was focusing on from a supply chain function. So anyway, sorry, I'm a nerd.
And what Toyota kind of perfected it with just in
That's
time.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, just in time. That's a perfect example. And if anybody's not familiar with just in time, look it up. But basically, just in time is the idea that literally just as it sounds, it's that the things will show up exactly when you need it, because otherwise your cost can be so high because you are needing to store things in warehouses and so on and so forth as you wait for it. And when things show up just in time, it allows you to avoid that. Now, where that bites you eventually is when COVID-19 happens and now there's supply chain issues and there's no warehouses storing them because everybody moved to just in time, and hence what we experienced and I think are finally over now.
Close.
Yeah.
I think I read somewhere where experts are predicting that by the second half of 2023, the supply chain issues are going to
Is that crazy? Gotcha.
We'll see.
Yeah.
But that's what I read.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving along, I kind of take this idea validation process into 3 stages. That first part was kind of looking at why it's important, the questions you should ask, and look at it from an angle of a problem instead of an idea. The next stage is if you think you now have an idea that's solving a problem, this is where market research comes in. And that's where you really have to hone in on, well, who's my demographic? And are there any competitors in the marketplace?
Yeah.
And as part of that, there's some really good questions that you could ask, because again, if you attach it to a problem, but is the problem frequent enough? If somebody's facing a problem, but they face it once a year or once every 5 years, it might not be a market for it. And I remember reading something, I don't know what book it was, but it was, I think it's Google, that they approach everything as, is it a toothbrush? Because you have to use a toothbrush every day because it's solving a very specific problem. And because it's every day, it's also habit forming. Those are the most brilliant product because it solves a frequent problem and it's habit forming. And social media and some of these other stuff. But those are, in your market research process, you have to kind of look at. The other ones that you could look at is, can you protect your idea? Because as we talked about earlier, it's so easy to copy ideas. So if you can protect it and have some legal protection around it, then your chances of raising funds for it increases because somebody says, oh, there's something there. And then this one is a little bit more difficult to do, but I think it's doable when you really sit down. Is it sustainable? And 5 years from now, is it still going to be needed? And that's kind of where you have to kind of put yourself in shoes of your future self, and then look back and say, is this going to be important or needed 5-10 years from now? That will give you a good rounded idea of demographics, competition, problem, and are people going to need it for a sustained period of time to make it a business?
I think a couple of things that you said there is interesting. Once more, I can't wait for us to talk about AI, because that's one of those things now when you're looking at that and you're thinking 5 years, you got to think about it with that in mind, because people right now who are thinking about things like copywriting, accounting, or like the ideas now you really want to look at is how are you the one who creates the tools that are sitting on ChatGPT or whatever it is out there to be able to solve for those. And like, so you got to make sure you're solving it with that far enough timeline out that you don't solve it for something that's only a 2-year solve because something else is coming that's
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
You were mentioning the toothbrush. What I find interesting about that, though, and this maybe shows hope, that sometimes an idea that now can appear like, something people use as an example, because as you said with toothbrush, it's like in that test. Well, funny enough, like I think it was 1917, 1920. My dates are going to be all wrong here. That's what, again, ChatGPT and Google are for. But ultimately, people like only like 13 or 17% of people brushed their teeth actually in the early part of the, I guess, 20th century. So like 17, 1920, whatever it is. And it actually didn't become something that was more popular until the military had actually realized that too many people were not able to fight in war because they'd be out because they'd have some crazy thing happening in their mouth because they didn't care for their teeth and they were bad. So they were actually the first ones who started saying you should do it. But that still didn't solve it. What actually finally solved it is I'm a big fan of habit loops. And in this case, I want to say might have been Charles Duhigg book, Power of Habits. He talks about the fact that there was a marketer who was hired at one point. And one of the things he did is he connected to people like, when you feel that phlegm on your teeth, it's time to brush. That means they're dirty. And it started connecting to people to actually know, oh, that's not good. But even then, that wasn't quite enough either. What happened then is the toothpaste manufacturers, started creating thing in toothpaste, because back then it probably just tastes like regular baking soda, which they still recommend to a degree today. But they added a minty flavor, which helped. But what they did also is they added this chemical or whatever in it that creates the foaming effect. So now you say, okay, I have phlegm. Oh, I'm brushing. Oh, it's fresh now. And I see that stuff. It must really be doing a great job. So it's like almost all these tricks that are played on us, which I think it's great when you could do it when the outcome makes you in a kind of better hygiene. So you could only use that example now, or Google could only use that example because a solid product with the toothpaste combined with solid marketing actually made that product something that people then needed, even though they didn't know they needed it.
Yeah. It reminds me of another story, similar. When the washing machine was invented, Tide and some of those companies were having a hard time selling detergent because people just, how do you know something is clean? You don't. Unless there's a big stain on something and clean, you really don't know something is clean. So after talking to consumers, and again, they were in the idea validation, but also in the marketing phase of getting feedback. That's how they ended up with giving detergent scent, because they realized that being clean is more of a feeling than a visual touching thing. So when something smells a certain way, it feels clean. You don't actually know if it's clean. And that's what those companies capitalize on, is the feeling that people have.
Yeah, you know what? Febreze was something similar where they developed the technology. I think because if I remember correctly, oh man, maybe this was a test they did or what, but there was basically like they had a technology that was able to basically take these sensor things and like entrap them or something. I'm probably butchering it, but the idea is at the time customers were like, I don't care. Why do we need it? But when they told them that and they added the scent, all of a sudden now the reward, and people will spray these things at the end of it, the reward you get is the scent. And that has you, these. Again, between Duhigg's book, I think Hook, the author, I think he actually recommended your book, actually, if I'm not mistaken.
I know the author, Neil Ayal. So he actually read my manuscript and provided a testimonial, a really good one.
That's awesome. I think these hooks, if you will, that they both talk about, be it through habits or be it through, that and the technology, are so key. And I think some of these stories are also important as people are going through the idea validation to also know or acknowledge that sometimes something that didn't work, it could be something wrong also on how you're marketing or positioning it in the first place. And I know even in the workplace, many times we had different ideas that we might have, come forward with and mentioned, and they might not have got any traction because of like what our approach was to it. And we would sometimes change our approach, or sometimes we wouldn't because we might leverage the other approach, which is simply get it into the ear of an influencer who believes in it. They'll come and mention it. And then all of a sudden with their authority and they walk in the room, everybody else is like, that's a great idea. Let's do it. So I think there's some different techniques people could do there as well. So,
and that's actually a really good segue into kind of the last third phase of idea validation that I always use, which is actually getting in front of potential customers, users, whatever the product service is that you have. I usually do it in two ways. One is the easy way. If you're very clear on what problem you're solving and what the idea is, then find 200, 300 people on social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, wherever your demographic is, and just start reaching out to them. I usually use that 300 number because I'm looking for about 15 to 20 responses. And that 15 to 20 response, depending on what the response is a pretty good indication that am I onto something here? Is that do I have 15 and 20 people that are actually going to pay me for this product or not? And that also, indirectly is a good networking mechanism too, because you're actually now reaching out to 200-300 people, not with a sales pitch, but more like hey, I see you're an expert in this industry. I would love your opinion. And people in general love to be thought as an authoritative figure somewhere. And it's not cold emails where you're going to get like a 2% response. Your chance of response is pretty high. Then the more complex way of validating your idea is setting up a landing page, running some social media ads or organic traffic to that landing page, and see if people actually are interested in that product or service that you have. ChatGTP and AI tools make this a little easier. But that's kind of the three-step process. Making sure that you're clear on the problem and idea, market research, and then getting in front of actual customers and talking to them.
The piece that you said about getting in front of actual customers, I think another element to that could be a great benefit is when you're talking to them, that's when they may tell you no, but if it did this, I'm in. And that's what lets you actually enhance and make a better product that you then know. And especially there's some folks out there who actually say, great, I'm building that now. Would you be willing to spend $200 on it? Like, I want to test how real this is and if you're willing to do it. And some people will actually say, great, they'll have a Stripe account or PayPal set up and be like Venmo, and have them send the money over. Because if they're willing to do that now to solve the problem, you absolutely have it then. But I think that's something. Yeah. But I think then during that period, that feedback you get could be critical because that's when you could take bourbon and turn it into Instagram. Before you spent, whatever thousands or millions to build the thing and have it, potentially fail because you spent all your money on it.
Yeah. And speaking of feedback, you guys have any feedback for us on what topics we should cover in the future? Please drop it in comments or wherever you're watching or listening to this. And that's it for episode 4. We'll see you guys in episode 5. Thank you.
See you, everyone.